thank you all for joining today. We're really excited to actually share out a number of folks have been following this along the way as we've been developing it, but the dashboard for rapid vehicle electrification. It's a joint venture between the Electrification Coalition and Atlas Policy. Ultimately, something we've been wanting to develop for a couple of years now, but have been working over the last couple months and are excited to have it available for free download for users, and overall want to do this next hour, just really highlighting some of the different functions and features of the tool. But as I mentioned, and actually I realized I need to introduce myself too, I'm Matt Stevens-Rich with the Electrification Coalition Program Manager, where I get to do a lot of work with different public and private fleets. And really, fleet analysis is no new aspect to how we look at where EVs can be of a good fit when it comes to both total cost reduction as well as emission reduction. By and large, though, there are a lot of ways you can do that type of analysis work. With that, when you're looking at different telematics options or other options, that can sometimes be costly, take weeks or even months to do those types of analysis, and also can be a little difficult to interpret results as they come back. When you look over even just the last decade, we've seen a lot of tremendous improvements and evolution to that approach. But at the same time, we also recognize that for a lot of fleets, that can be a very difficult thing to be able to accomplish. So, entering then that gap of need is the DRVE tool, where we've really developed it to be an easy to access, easy to use analysis tool, really something designed for the faint of heart, where as we hear back from fleets, they need just some light touches on seeing where EVs can be of a good fit in deployment, and overall seeing this as a tool that they can use to help fill in that need. Another important aspect too that we've seen with how analysis tools are typically conducted, there's often a segmentation. You need to do a light duty analysis and then maybe a medium and heavy duty analysis on the side. So differences between how you look at sedans versus dump trucks or other options like that. With this tool, we really wanted to bring that all together and have it be available as doing light, medium, and heavy duty vehicle analysis. So Josh and Connor on the Atlas team will be able to share more on how we are able to pull that off. But overall, we really focus again on having that output both on the data-rich and the chart-rich side of things. So a couple example screen grabs here, which we'll show as we go more through the tool. Again, wanting to really focus on how can we provide simple analysis, if only just an easy way for fleet users and those needing to do this type of analysis work to start wading into the water. Telematics is still a phenomenal resource and tool, especially when you need to go in the weeds, really deep detail on a vehicle by vehicle basis. But overall, we really wanted to develop something that can be used by the masses as an easy starting point. And so too, to that matter, again, we really wanted this tool to not just be designed for hundreds and thousands of fleet vehicle operators where they really have a large fleet pool, but also small fleet operators as well. Already, we've actually heard back from small townships, municipalities, the likes of that, where they're really focusing on just one or two vehicle analyses and seeing how that can be a good fit. So with that, as just a quick intro, I'm going to go ahead and hand it over to Josh and Connor. But before I do that, actually, I saw dropped in the chat. Again, the tool is actually live now, so you can download that at electrificationcoalition.org/drive. That's DRVE. So feel free to download that as we're going along here. We will be going step by step through the tool as well, but we'll follow up with all registrants as well with that link too. So definitely don't want to leave you guys hanging on where do I get the tool or where do I find it. But with it, we're really focused on how can we just improve that analysis process, knowing that with the number of fleets, they just really need a simple capture of where total cost of ownership can be seen as they're going through. So with that, I'll go ahead and stop my screen share, and we're going to do a quick transition over to Josh and Connor. So Josh and Connor, go ahead and take it away.
Thanks for that, Matt. I'm going to kick us off for the Atlas side. Hi, everyone. I'm Connor Smith with Atlas Policy, and have had the privilege of working with Matt and the EC team and Josh and some others on the Atlas team to get to this point. And yeah, we're excited to kind of continue rolling this out and hopefully continue adding features to this tool and working with you all to make it as useful and impactful as we can. So that I'll give a little screen share of my own and walk you through a couple of the different bits on just how we got here. So as we've mentioned, this is, well, a little bit on Atlas first, I guess. Atlas is a DC-based policy startup. We've been around for a little bit more than 5 years now. And our mission is to kind of equip policymakers and decision makers with data-informed tools and strategies to help influence the conversation in key fields, transportation electrification being one of those. So briefly, we'll kind of walk through some of the front end work that we've been doing with different cities as we've been developing this tool. Josh will go through a really comprehensive demonstration of how the tool actually works and walk through using it. And then we will also show you a little bit of how some of the results are being presented in dashboards and Excel-based reports. So at a high level, sorry, let me minimize this guy here. Some of the high-level insights that DRVE can provide here is near-term procurement opportunities. This is something new that we're trying to work into the tool, where we kind of take an overall total cost of the vehicles over their entire lifetime and compare those to those conventional vehicles to comparable EVs. And what the tool can provide is an assessment, both like the counts of the number of vehicles in the fleet that are offering savings on a per vehicle basis, as well as specific savings assessments, vehicle by vehicle at the VIN level. In addition to that, some other outputs of the DRVE tool are comparisons of both lifetime and per mile costs at the vehicle model level, as well as averages by use case, like sedans and SUVs and things like that. So that's kind of where we're building more and more features into the tool. In addition to that, we include emissions analyses on the per mile basis to compare both model by model as well as averages across classes, so light duty versus medium duty versus heavy duty as well. And in addition to that, we have several different kinds of filters that we've built into the results dashboards and reports, where you can, depending on the inputs that you use on the front end when you're going through the process of building your scenarios and running the analysis, you can apply those filters at different levels and see the impacts that those have on the savings potential of electrification across your fleet. And on the front end, there's a couple of things that are kind of important to hash out initially, and a couple of key data fields that are really important for getting at least a ballpark analysis going. The most important thing being the fleet inventory. We've been asking everybody that we've been working with for this initially. And the tool is based off of a software that requires VIN numbers. So an inventory of vehicles by VINs, as well as any usage data on those vehicles that's available. And a lot of times that's odometer readings and the entire useful life of those vehicles, or when they were put into operation, that we can kind of assess annual VMT from that. In addition to that, fuel cost data is really important. Just averages, basically what the city or whatever the fleet entity is pays for those prices, because they're usually much lower than the average default values that the tool has built into it. And I'll also note that the tool does have default values for everything that's not available initially. Beyond that, we are able to input any operational cost data that can be inputted at the per vehicle level. And we're working to build new features into the tool that allow for more kind of averages to be applied as well by either the use case or the class of the vehicle. In addition to that, another important thing for these analyses is determining whether your vehicles are eligible for either the federal tax credit or anything that might be available at the state or local level. So just assessing the likelihood of achieving those and how much of the value of those tax credits or rebates should be applied to your vehicles. So that's kind of, in a nutshell, some of the key inputs, and Josh will walk through some more of these when we're going through the process there. And with that, I might actually turn it over to Josh to speak a little bit more about the process here.
Great. Thanks, Connor, and thanks, Matt, for those introductions. Just a quick introduction. Hello, everyone. My name is Josh Rosenberg with Atlas Public Policy. I'm the lead developer of this DRVE tool. So a quick overview of how the tool works and kind of like high-level description of the process. So essentially, you'll be able to use the tool to load in the data, and the data just assumes that you'll have kind of VIN level data for each vehicle, and it'll be able to use that VIN data to make a consistent mapping to a make, model, and get the information for the vehicle. And I'll explain that more as we go through the tool. From that, you'll be able to map all the vehicles that were identified in the fleet to alternatives, so that you'll be able to model what the vehicles will be replaced with when they're retired or when the next procurement cycle is coming. You'll be able to set options, myriad of options like fuel prices, infrastructure costs, and different procurement options such as like a cash, lease, or loan purchase for either the infrastructure or even the vehicles you're procuring. You'll be able to run all of those through a robust analysis, and lastly, view the results of that analysis. And we'll walk you through both those steps as we demonstrate the tool. So just a quick looking into the future of what's to come with this tool. A couple features that are in discussion now that we're looking to roll out in the near future is more robust recommendations from the tool. So right now we kind of provide the analysis of the total cost of ownership for these vehicles and where like the cost savings lie. We're hoping to provide more of structure to the recommendations from this analysis as an output. We're also looking to support additional modeling or mapping for each vehicle. So you'll be able to model procuring a couple different options for one fleet vehicle, whereas now it's going to be kind of a one-to-one comparison where you'll be able to compare one EV and conventional alternative per each fleet vehicle you input. We're also looking to increase flexibility with adding incentives and rebates, as well as adding more support for settings at the use case or vehicle model level, as some right now are only enabling you to apply them across your entire fleet. And we'll walk through that as well. And with that, I'm going to take over sharing and start walking you through this tool. So as Matt has explained, it's currently available for download on the EC site as well as the Atlas site. I have a version downloaded here, and the entire tool is contained inside an Excel file. This makes it portable, and it allows users to run it with just the caveat of having Excel installed in your machine. And we're working now to make sure we release updates to ensure that it works correctly for all versions of Excel that users have. So we're going to open it up, and it should launch right into the tool. So the tool will be contained in this friendly interface that should be easier to navigate than some more complicated Excel models. This is the home page of the tool, and from here you have one of three options. You can either open a results file, and this is if you already have the analysis run from a previous use of the tool, and you want to just view the results in the Excel-based dashboard or generate a report. You can click this button and then just bring your results file right in. You can open a process fleet. This is if you've used the tool before and you were able to export a process fleet with vehicle mappings. This enables you to rerun the tool and edit the mappings as you want to run different analyses. And it kind of enables you to not have to redo the VIN decoding step because that could be a timely matter in some cases. And lastly, you can import a new fleet, and this is what we're going to walk through. This is what any first-time users of the tool should do. So the tool currently supports Excel and CSV file types. Similar to other programs, you're just going to hit open, and you can navigate your file system to select a file. We have demo data here, a couple of fleet, about 40 vehicles with a good mix of medium, light, and heavy duty, and use cases that should enable us to kind of explore what we can do with a mix of vehicles. So the tool just asks that you specify the worksheet where the data of the vehicles lies, and then that should auto-populate these boxes here, so you can select the column name where the VIN data lies. And then these two options will appear. You can select a column that contains the years of use. This would be a column just with an integer value for the number of, or for the useful life of the vehicle. And that's used to determine the total miles traveled across the life of the vehicle. So we have that data here. If you don't have it, you can skip this box and a default of 7 years will be used. And then lastly, we have annual VMT. This, we've noticed with some fleets, has been more difficult of a data point to get. So if you don't have it, we also offer the default of 12,000 miles per year. We're looking in a future version to add more customization to what the default could be across the vehicles, and maybe set more options for specifying annual VMT per use case if you don't have the data available. So once everything looks correct here, you can hit next. This will kick off a VIN decoding step and process the fleet. We do live VIN decoding using NHTSA's VPIC service, which will accept VINs as parameters and send back a make and model and all the information you need on the vehicle, so we can be consistent for any fleet that wants to import their data. We're currently working on optimizing this as well. You'll notice it can handle 40 vehicles in just a couple seconds, but we've recently identified an optimization which is going to make this a lot faster for fleets with much more than 40 vehicles. So fleet processing has completed, and you'll see that we just have the vehicles found in the fleet in this box right here, just for the user to like ensure that everything that they've included in their fleet is represented in the processing. So the next step here is the fleet vehicle mapping. And this is a pretty important step for ensuring that each vehicle in your fleet is modeled to the vehicle you want to see procured. So all of the unique vehicles will be in this box over here, and we'll walk through an example of mapping a vehicle. So we provide automatic mappings for each of the vehicles found in the fleet. We do this for most vehicles. For most common fleet vehicles, we have a specific mapping for that make and model. But for vehicles that we don't have a specific mapping, there are a default set for each use case. So if there's a new sedan that hit the market that we haven't updated the tool with, and you've included it in this, there'll be a default for each sedan, which will be used. And you'll be able to manually override that in the tool. So we see here the Ford Taurus will be mapped to a Taurus as a baseline replacement, and then the EV replacement for that vehicle will be a Bolt. So we're going to model when the Taurus we need to find a procurement to replace the Taurus. These are the vehicles that will be modeled. And you can edit all of these settings and customize it for each vehicle to make it more accurate for whatever procurement goals you may have. So we'll do an example of setting a custom mapping. So in an example where fleet managers might be interested in procuring a Tesla Model 3 in place of a Taurus instead of the Bolt. You can change that here, as well as update any of the other settings. We try to include as many models as we can, but for some we don't have the MSRP data. If that is the case, you'll just have to add a custom value, and the tool won't let you add one without a blank MSRP. So we'll just find one with one. The Tesla Model 3 Standard Range Plus does have an MSRP and all the value, and it seems closer with the Ford Taurus, so it looks like a better procurement option. So you can customize the fuel economy if you want to model, say, vehicles. If you don't think they'll get as efficient as is modeled here, you can update all of that. You can also set custom maintenance and repair costs, as well as insurance costs. These are currently set by default, depending on the use case of the vehicle, and you can override these as well. Put an example here of 6 cents per mile for the first 5 years and 8 cents per mile for the last 5. We can also update the insurance cost to 2,000, and we see for this, there's no federal tax incentive. These will be applied automatically as well. In a case where you can apply a setting, we'll just, as an example, add this. And then once everything looks correct and it's mapped as you want it to, you can update this. And now this will be the model that's used when the analysis is run. And you can do this for each of the unique vehicles in your fleet. Once it's done, you can save that. So we will save this to our desktop here. It'll just be one if it's overwriting another file. And now you can use that at the beginning to skip over the fleet processing step and go right to this mapping page, where if everything's mapped already previously, you can just hit next if you don't want to change anything. There's also another option here, use case, which I'll touch on just briefly. So we try to set, these are manually defined by us, the developers of the tool. And these are used to kind of set settings based on how the vehicle will be used. But if you want to see a vehicle mapped to another use case, you can change these as well. So all of these settings are editable by the user, and you can set whatever settings better fit your procurement needs. And these vehicle lists are based on data that comes from fueleconomy.gov. It's updated fairly frequently, but I would say always be on the lookout for new versions of the tool as we're constantly updating the available vehicles to better reflect the current state of the market. All right, we're going to go ahead to the next step here. So this is the analysis settings part of the tool. For this, we just ask that you input a valid zip code, and that zip code is going to be used to set local market conditions. So because we're based out of DC, I'll use the DC zip code. And I've created analysis settings for this prior to using the tool. So we'll start with that just so we don't have to put in a setting for each of the ones, and we'll just walk through them. So this file right here should contain our settings. Might just take a second to load up. All right, so there's 3 pages where you can add settings. I'll touch on each one and try to explain how each of the settings, is rolled into the tool. The first page we have is market conditions. These are things such as fuel price, carbon costs, and different conditions that would affect the total cost of ownership of owning an EV over a conventional vehicle, depending on fuel prices and such. So for each of these settings, we enable the flexibility for adding as many settings as you want. And I'll explain how all of that is incorporated into the analysis as well. So these are settings reflected from a previous run of the tool where I exported settings. You can add as many gasoline prices as you want. So we have $2.72 in here. The default value is set based on the zip code, and the custom value can be any valid setting. It depends on the setting that we're on, but most of them require just an integer value or a decimal value in this case. So we can add and also remove settings. So if we wanted to see $3 instead of 2, we can remove 272. And that's how you'd add and remove settings for any of these cases. You can model a bunch of different settings for each one, and then those will be applied across all other scenarios. So for each setting you add, it adds to the complexity of the model, but it also enables you to explore how differences in settings affect the procurement in real time. So you'll be able to filter based on if the diesel price was $3.27 or $4 and kind of see how that affects the total cost of ownership as you're viewing the report. So just to give an overview of all the settings here, we have gasoline price, diesel price, electricity price, which you just set the $1 per kilowatt hour, inflation rate, public charging en route, and cost of downtime from public charging, as well as the cost of carbon. You can choose whether or not to include this. The setting we have already is that it's not included, but if we want to include $40 cost per ton, if that's what's going to be expected to be paid by the fleet, we can add that and then remove the setting where it's not included. And that covers all the settings for market conditions. To navigate to the other pages, you can either click on the tabs here or use these buttons. So for charging strategy, which is our next page, there's 3 main settings. We have the charging mix, the maximum power for public charging only, and if the procurement includes EV charging. So we'll start with charging mix. You can create a custom one here or add a default. I'll show you the default mix. This is just a way to specify where the charging is going to be done by the fleet. And you can specify a couple different mixes to model how different concentrations of charging at depot versus charging in public will affect the total cost of ownership of owning the EVs. So the default here is just 100% home charging. We have a custom here where you can actually edit it. We have 50% depot charging, 40% public charging, and 10% en route. If we wanted to just see 50% depot or home charging and 50% public charging with 0% en route, we can model that instead, and that'll update the setting. And you can, like all other settings, you can add as many charging mixes as you want to model different scenarios. The other setting I'll show you, maximum power for public charging is just an integer. It'll represent the maximum power a vehicle can get from public charging. A default value is just 50. And then this setting, procurement includes EV charging, allows you to set infrastructure costs and charging procurement. So we can create a custom here, and you can specify whether the procurement includes EV charging or not. So we can model 2 scenarios where it doesn't include an EV charging. And for this setting, you can actually choose which vehicle use cases this applies to. So if we hit select all, it'll apply to all use cases. And we just name each setting, which enables us to explore them better when we're looking at the report. We can call this no charging. We can delete this old setting, and we can actually add another one that just is level 2 charging. So you can set a ratio. So we can say this will be a 3-to-1 procurement. So for every station, there'll be 3 EVs charging on it. Equipment costs, we'll just use a couple values here. We'll say 1,000 for each, and then $300 a year for maintenance costs. These are just a couple example values from a previous run of the tool. For this, we can say we only want to apply this to more light duty use cases. So a pickup truck, a sedan, SUV, and a minivan. And we can label this level 2 charging. Right now we have 2 settings for charging procurement, which will be modeled. The last tab here is the procurement strategy. And there's a couple of really important settings in this as well. I'll walk through each one. So the discount rate for NPV, or net present value calculations, just specifies the rate at which each vehicle will depreciate, because that factors into the total cost of owning that vehicle as an asset, and it's associated as a cost. So we have 5 here. We can just say 0 if there's no discount rate. Pricing approach, you can select that the procurement is either going to be MSRP less discounts approach or a dealer cost plus the markup. And in each of these scenarios, you would just specify what the discount or markup is. We have, as one of our options, MSRP less discounts with 100% or $1,000 discount. Next, we have ownership strategy. This is, I'd say this is the most important setting in this page. It allows you to choose how the vehicles are going to be procured. So we have a couple options here. You can do a cash or a loan purchase. We also have a couple options for leases. And in each of these scenarios, the relevant settings that apply to this ownership structure will be present, and the tool will just make sure that you have valid values for each of these. We'll keep it simple in this case. We'll just say it's a cash procurement. And for each of these, you would just specify if you want to monetize the tax credit. This includes both the federal and state tax credit. Save that. We have battery electric vehicle state incentives and plug-in hybrid electric vehicle state incentives. For each of those, we have a default value of 2,000 for the BEV and 1,000 for the plug-in. We can keep those, but you can add a couple different incentive scenarios, and these settings will be applied across the entire fleet. A couple other settings, we have non-tax incentives you can apply per vehicle, initial fees. This could be just taxes or other fees you anticipate to tack on to the price of each vehicle. And then lastly, we have these two settings. Let me make sure I explain these a little bit too, because they could get a little confusing. So we have insurance adjustment and the federal tax credit adjustment. This is enabling you to kind of scale the insurance or federal tax credit that's applied across all the vehicles by a consistent factor. So for the Fed tax credit adjustment, if you wanted to only capture 50% of the federal tax credit that you've modeled, you can add in 0.5 and that'll scale the number down. Likewise for insurance, if you want to model with just 80% of the upfront insurance costs that were included in the vehicle mapping, you can include that as well. So that covers all of the settings that we currently have in the tool. Like mentioned earlier, one of the improvements we're hoping to make in the near future is to allow some of these settings to be applied at the use case level. Right now, most of these, when you add them, they are applied across the entire fleet. But we're going to try to increase that or improve that flexibility and allow users to kind of set it based on only a subgroup of vehicles and kind of narrow down the result set. So once you add in all your settings, you can save them and use them in a future analysis. We'll call this drive analysis settings demo. I'll just save that to my desktop. Right, now that all the settings are in, you can go back, check them, make sure they're all good, and then just hit run analysis. This will kick off the analysis run portion of the tool, where each of the settings you've inputted are being merged together into like a master table of scenarios. And each of those scenarios will be run through the tool to assess the net present value, the total cost of ownership, as well as the emissions from each vehicle. It's currently running, and we give a rate as well as like an estimated time of completion. Since we're using a pretty small fleet here, there's only 400 scenarios. But as you increase in fleet size and increase in the number of settings you add, this can get to be a fairly large number. So we're working on optimizing how fast this runs. But we anticipate that it won't take too long depending on how big your fleet is. But if you do add a bunch of settings that, it can come to be a couple hours if you have like a million scenarios, which is why we recommend kind of adding only the settings that you feel are like more accurate to your procurement case, so that we can kind of optimize the way this tool is run. But we're looking to kind of add that in as additional features to make sure that the scenarios run only reflect the ones we want to run. So the analysis is complete, everything's run. From here, you can either save the analysis results or view them, and I'll explain the difference there. So saving the analysis results will generate an analysis results file. This contains all the scenarios as well as the input and output values. It's not very readable by humans, or I should say it's not very readable by the layman, meaning it's a lot of numbers and parameters, which is why we provide the dashboard to kind of make sense of the results of the analysis. So we can save them to use them in a future view of it, and I'll also explain viewing them in the PowerBI dashboard. Saving now. And once they're saved, you can actually view them. And this will bring us to the Excel version of the dashboard and the report, which is one of the options for viewing the results of this analysis. And after I show you that, we'll show you another option, which is the PowerBI Dashboard, which is a premium feature, which we're hoping to make more public in the near future and make it an option for most of the users of the tool. Right now, it's just restricted to a couple pilot cities that we're working with because of the cost of setting it up right now, but we're looking to make that more cost effective and efficient.
Josh, as you're doing that, thank you everyone for dropping in questions. We'll be able to get to those as well. Hopefully some of these questions actually have been answered as folks have been a little bit ahead of your presentation, but want to acknowledge that we're keeping track of all the questions as they're coming in, answering some, and then we'll also do a run through on those too.
Awesome. So sometimes it could just take a little bit. And it looks like there is an issue with viewing the results. So we're gonna close this for now and try to open it up again and just view the results from the homepage of the tool, which is a good opportunity to show that feature.
Actually, one question that was thrown out, just to clarify for folks, there is indeed a user guide. Gratefully, you don't just have to tune into the webinar to follow Josh's steps here. So there is indeed a user guide. We've been updating that guide as we have added in some new features as we go. But just to get that question out of the way.
Looks like there is an issue with this, with these results. So I'm going to pull up another version that I can kind of hopefully show you how it works in the back, how the dashboard and results look. And in the meantime, let's take a look at how they are represented in the PowerBI dashboard while I get that running. So we have this dashboard that we've made available to the pilot cities that we've initially worked with. And we're looking to make this more available to the public as a premium option. The way to view this is we've set up a process where they can upload the analysis results that's generated from the tool and view the results in this dashboard, where you can actually drill down on the specific settings, as well as view specific scenarios where the likelihood for procuring EVs is higher than others. So we include all of these filters where you can drill down based on the vehicle class or use case or even make and model, as well as view specific scenarios where it may be more or less likely. So in this case, we can view only scenarios where procurement is very likely, and we can expand this and see which of those use cases are actually presenting the savings. Looks like there's a slight issue with this visual, but I'm good with some of the other tabs that are in this dashboard as well. So we have an advanced tab here. And this allows you to view all of the scenarios that have been run through the tool and kind of where they lie on the likeliness or the likelihood of a vehicle being cheaper to procure, as well as a breakdown for the percentage of scenarios where there was a where there were options for cost-effective procurements. You can actually explore all the scenarios in this table here. We also provide this analysis report page. And in this, you'll be able to explore the cost breakdown per mile for all the different use cases, as well as the average percentage savings for each make and model. And this is for light duty vehicles. We also have environmental impact, which shows the well-to-wheel emissions for particulate matter and other emission types. And all of these can be filtered down based on the vehicle make model scenario, as well as other cases. So I'm going to stop sharing for now and maybe answer some questions while we get that other report up and running. But if there are any questions in the chat that I can answer in the meantime, that would be awesome.
Cool. Thanks for that, Josh. Yeah, this is the fun part of doing live tech demos.
Yeah.
So appreciate you walking folks through. Indeed, we do have a lot of questions, so we'll try to do our best to kind of triage through those. So Connor and Josh, appreciate all your insight as we go through this. One leading question, actually, which was on the dashboard, was how are we accounting for residual value and depreciation? I'll start off there of how is that being factored in, especially for fleets that might be thinking about resale options.
So depreciation is calculated based on the discount factor setting that I was talking about before in the tool. That setting kind of allows you to establish how fast the vehicle depreciates. We also try to work in some like real world data for specific makes and models on how much they depreciate over a certain lifespan, and we include that in the calculations for, I believe, for all vehicle use cases. Actually, we include that, so it's part of the calculation, and I believe it's explained in the user guide too how we calculate depreciation, if you want to check that out.
Thanks for that, Josh. We especially, a lot of feedback, especially in the piloting that we've been doing. And as a little more background, overall, this tool has been developed with funding through the Bloomberg Philanthropies and the work that we do with the American Cities Climate Challenge. So we've been able to work with a number of pilot cities there. Really appreciate all their time and effort because they were very helpful to help us develop the tool out. A big request we got back was indeed that depreciation moment, especially accounting for any resale moments or just as a general accounting practice that they have to do. So with that, indeed, you can control for that. Let us see. Another question that came up was, where can users find information for rebate or incentive amounts? I can actually go ahead and field that, and Connor dropped in a really helpful link. So overall, we let you control for different incentives or rebates. We're especially trying to be mindful of maybe you have dedicated grant funding or anything else that you are trying to account for in the tool as you're running it. There is a very helpful resource on the Alternative Fuel Data Center where you can look up laws and incentives that are specific both to federal and state levels. It also actually accounts for utilities, which do have some available incentives as well. So overall, you would need to go to an external site to find those incentives. If you need help finding that, please feel free to reach out, and we can definitely get you pointed in the right direction to find those resources. Another question, or actually, Josh, can throw it back to you. It looks like you're.
Yeah. So I guess briefly, I pulled up a version of this so I can show it. We're still working through the kinks of like getting this analysis results showed, and sometimes there's issues. So on that too, we're in constant development, and if any of the users experience any issues or find things they want to flag for us, we have a mailbox set up, which I'm going to link as well, to provide us with feedback, suggestions, or just if they're having any trouble with the tool, we can provide assistance. So pivoting to these results, this is what will load when you finish the analysis run and click view results. There's a kink there right now, but we're going to hopefully resolve that pretty soon. So this is the drive results dashboard based in Excel. This is available with the Excel version, and anyone who's running this can use it. So it enables you to see the total cost of ownership across different use cases, where those costs are coming from, whether it's depreciation, fuel, insurance, or maintenance, and kind of see how much of those are contributing factors, as well as similar to the PowerBI dashboard, which vehicles provide more percent savings, and what the total cost of ownership looks like across different procurement scenarios. All of this can be filtered and drilled down on. So similar to the PowerBI dashboard, you can view scenarios where the likelihood for an EV to be cheaper is likely or very likely. One of the caveats of this is when there's a big data model like this, sometimes the Excel version is a little limited, which is why we're providing this premium option in Power BI. So we can look at just passenger vehicles. And it seems like Excel is having a bit of struggle to load this. So we may just look at the report for now. Apologies about that. Another kink we're going to try and iron out. So this is the report page of the tool. This is automatically generated from the results of the tool. It provides a breakdown of the fleet summary, an explanation of the TCO analysis, as well as a couple charts explaining the breakdown. These are the same charts from the dashboard on the other page. We also show the average cost per mile by use case between the conventional and the EV alternative, as well as replacement vehicles that are suggested based on the average of % savings. Lastly, we show the top 100 vehicles that are suggested for procurement at the VIN level. So for each VIN, you can see what the average % savings is of that procurement scenario. And we're constantly updating this to try to provide a more robust analysis. You'll be able to save this report as a PDF. And once you save it, it'll pop right up. Just a second. Okay. So this is something that you can kind of get as a good output of the tool. It's just this report that kind of explains where the potential for electrification lie and some recommendations for which vehicles to focus on in the near term based on the settings that are provided. This is going to be constantly updated and improved as we go on. One of the new features we're hoping to roll out is additions to this report. But that is the dashboard and the report part in Excel of the tool. And I'll stop sharing and maybe we can hit a couple more questions.
Yeah, that report option, that was one that was heavily requested, especially we really want to focus on not just how this is a tool for calculating what total cost of ownership and emission factors look like, but also how can that lead immediately to procurement. So we have a couple additional features planned on how we can really help fleets through that process, not just doing the analysis, but thinking about the procurement. Having an automated report, we're really thinking about what's something you could put on your procurement or fleet manager's desk that helps fill out that case in as simple turnaround as possible. I'll go through a couple more questions here just to see if we can max out the 10 minutes remaining.
Yeah.
For EV options, how are those updated, Josh, as they come up and are added in?
So we have a data flow from fueleconomy.gov to the tool. We try to update it every quarter. We're going to roll in new options that have become available, and if there's other options that in the near term seem like good additions to the tool, we'll kind of add those in ad hoc. But it's a fairly automated process from all the information we can get from fueleconomy.gov into the tool, and we're gonna roll that out with each new release of the tool. But for every time you download the tool, the options will be just what was included at the time of download.
Yeah, and for any vendors that might be attending and in the audience, if your vehicle data is not being populated in here, please reach out to us. We are actively working with medium and heavy duty vendors because that is something that is manually coded in. So we definitely want to be sure that those vehicles and options are reflected in there. So please reach out if your data isn't being populated in there. We do want to just be sure we're capturing as much of that as possible. Some other questions. For demo data sets, is that something available? This is actually a helpful suggestion as we don't have that out. But indeed, would that be something, Connor and Josh, that we can share out for helping folks play with the tool?
Definitely. We can, right now we're using a pretty small set, but we can create a more robust demo data set that we can provide as part of the tool. And we'll definitely look to do that in the near term.
Yeah, another request too is actually sharing out the PDF output. We're happy to share that as well as part of that demo set. This is helpful comment and feedback on just how we can get better resources out to users. Law enforcement vehicle considerations, I think we actually covered that of how vehicles are being compared. Any thoughts though to that of how to code those in, as that'll sometimes just show up as a Ford Explorer, for instance.
Yeah.
Yeah,
So
sorry, Josh, I can jump in there really quick. For some of the cities, the pilot cities that we've been working with, we've just kind of been making assumptions based off of what we know are common police vehicles. So for example, in a lot of the mappings that I've done myself, I'll compare the Ford Explorer to a Ford Mustang Mach-E, something, that would be more likely to fit the needs and performance requirements of a police vehicle. Unfortunately, the VIN decoding process doesn't tell us off the immediate running of that, which Explorers are civilian Explorers and which ones are police fitted.
Yeah, thanks for that, Connor. To that end, on the inputs, we definitely got a lot of questions. So maybe just a quick rehash. What type of fleet data are folks needing to be sure to pull together? Is there a template? And what are the most important inputs they need to be mindful of?
Sure. So the inputs that I described earlier are most important. Definitely good VIN data, and then the annual vehicle miles traveled is also very important in terms of calculating how much fuel is going to be used by these vehicles. And years of use. So those three fields are going to be most important. Right now, we don't support maintenance costs on a vehicle by vehicle basis, but pulling that together and understanding what the average maintenance cost is across vehicle use cases and across each make and model will be pretty important for the custom mapping for each user. But those three fields essentially are all you need really to run the tool. Pulling together some supplementary data to understand what inputs you should be including in the settings and the custom mappings is also going to be helpful for users.
Yeah, and just to chime in there a little bit on the inputs question, we had a question come through in the chat as well, and one that I answered in the Q&A around, how are the defaults being set and are there explanations for where those are coming from? Yes, there are explanations for where those are coming from in the user guide. Things like the depreciation value, especially, that was something that was developed in a previous version of a fleet analysis tool that Atlas built. So we have borrowed from that and pulled that in and described that in the user guide. And we had a question on how, for the emissions analyses, are the different power factors and generation mixes being accounted for. That data is being pulled automatically based off of regional characteristics that Atlas has just recorded in a database that pulls from EIA and EPA and different sources there. So as long as you're entering your zip code and all the regional information, the tool is going to pull automatically for those characteristics.
And adding in maintenance costs too on a vehicle by vehicle level is definitely something we're going to look to try to include in a future release, because we believe that's very important. One of the tricky parts of that is that we've noticed that how that data is collected across a bunch of different fleets can vary tremendously. That's one of the difficulties in figuring out how to let users kind of input that at a vehicle by vehicle level, because right now we support the cost per mile data, and we've noticed some fleets just aren't able to process their data to get it in the same format that we're currently supporting. So it would be a matter of kind of updating the way we support maintenance costs and seeing how we can kind of adapt the tool to maybe accept a couple different inputs for that.
Thanks for that, Josh. Let's see. To the point of automating and accounting for costs for demand charges, this is always a good question, and we are finding it more in terms of electricity pricing. There are some limitations on how we account for that. Any thoughts on how to address that, Connor and Josh?
Yeah, that's a little bit tough, and we've kind of gone back and forth with some of the cities that we've worked with on just trying to even identify what the average electricity rate that people are paying is, which is not always clear, and especially for some fleets that don't have any EVs currently or haven't installed charging infrastructure to understand what rate schedule they'll be charged at. So that's, I think, to a certain level going to come down to the individual user setting those based off of your local knowledge is a lot greater than ours in many cases. So at the current moment, we don't have anything beyond the public charging cost and the average electricity price as inputs to the tool. But if there's enough demand for more complicated ways of like understanding these demand charges and other elements of EV rate schedules, then we can totally consider adding those as future elements. But it's just not something that we currently have built into the tool.
Yes, we're seeing that too with some city work as well. Especially when you're able to deal with time of use charging, there's some additional consideration and sophistication you need to bear in mind. So happy to follow up with anyone that would like to talk more on that moment too. Comparison of different ownership strategies. Josh, you covered that a little bit in terms of how vehicles are being purchased. But any thoughts on how to account for if it's a lease versus a cash purchase or other types of moments like that we've seen in fleets?
So right now we do support like all those types of lease procurements as well as cash and loan. Like I said before, when you select those procurement types, it applies them across the entire fleet. So multiple procurement strategies, cash versus loan, will model the entire fleet for cash and the entire fleet for loan, and you can see the difference. But one of the features we're hoping to roll out pretty soon is the ability to customize that so that you can select which either vehicle makes or vehicle use cases that setting applies to, so that you can kind of customize which vehicles are procured by cash, which vehicles are procured by loan, and so on.
We also, real quickly, we had one question that I'm seeing now that I was just getting to typing to, processing time for different fleets. We've used a pretty small one in this analysis, but I'll say that from our experience processing much larger fleets in the order of like 4,000 plus vehicles, depending on how many settings you apply, it can take longer, obviously, but with a limited number of settings and a setting established for every input, I've been able to run fleets of around 5,000 vehicles in under 20 minutes.
And also important to clarify, we're not running this on like high-powered machines. We're definitely aspiring to use very average computers when we do it, accounting for that.
We'll echo that processing time could vary greatly depending on just the machine you're running it on. So if you have a much faster computer, because of how Excel works and because this is based completely on Excel, it could run a lot faster than on a slower computer. Yeah.
I know we're at the top of the hour, so maybe I'll just try to find this as a sign-off question. I feel like we were able to actually answer just about every question thrown out there. If you do have any additional ones, again, all registrants will be receiving follow-up links and contact, so please reach out with any questions you have. And overall, this is the beginning of the tool launch, so we definitely want to be responsive to folks' thoughts, just general input and how they're using the tool, as ultimately we would love to just incorporate feedback into subsequent updates. We have a lot of stuff planned out. But final question is for saving and importing fleet data. There's a general question around, do I need to create a user account or how do I do that? I'll start the answer and hand it off to Josh. But for creating a user account, that's not required. We are, however, capturing, we just have a simple registration. Overall, we just want to capture folks' emails so we can keep you posted as new updated versions come out of the tool. But with that, Josh, how do folks save data and resume on that later on?
Yeah, so we made it pretty simple. Essentially, as you're running the tool, you just save it as a file on your computer, and then you can just import it like that. So it doesn't require any registration or anything like that. It's pretty static with just being able to export and import like Excel files generated there. So as long as you save the files that are saved and exported out of the tool, you'll be able to reuse them in a future run of it.
Great, thanks for that. Well, I'll draw it to a close there. Thank you to everyone who attended and everyone who has downloaded and used the tool. And please, as I said before, please feel free to reach out with general feedback on the tool. We want to just really hear how folks are using it and finding use for it. But with that, we'll call it a close. Thank you, Connor and Josh, for joining and walking us through the tool. Again, we'll follow up with all recording and all the relative links that we were throwing out here, as well as just general resources. But please feel free to follow up. And otherwise, I hope everyone is having success using the tool and also finding good use for it in terms of how they're finding EV and best fit in their fleets. So with that, thanks so much and hope everyone has a good day.